Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr.
And I'm Christine Williams.
Listening to Fiber Talk, that twice weekly podcast for people who make fine art with needle and thread.
Indeed.
And our guest, our fine art making guest this week, Linda Stolz of Erica Michaels Needleart Designs. Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you?
I think we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
There's potential.
I'm happy to be here and kind of excited to see where this chat goes this evening. So.
Well, we are every time, so that works out just fine. Okay, so you're one of those rare ones in that you got a home economics degree.
Yes, when it was still called home economics.
Yes,
exactly.
When I read that, because when I first started teaching back in '77,
okay,
there was a home economics teacher at the middle school, because that was when they did the usual deal, and that was the last home economics teacher I ever encountered, because that whole thing went away quickly.
Yes, probably not too far long after I graduated, but I couldn't say exactly when. But yeah, you're right. They started calling it something else, human ecology or something after a while.
Oh, spare me.
Yeah, now it's family and consumer sciences.
It's what?
Family and consumer sciences.
Oh, come on. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So yes, the term home economics does date us a little bit. So.
That's just too much time with a thesaurus here. So home economics and interior design. So what did you do with that?
Well, when I graduated, I actually got a job with an interior design firm.
Okay.
And just kind of working with them. I ended up being more their office manager as opposed to another designer. But after I actually kind of realized that I wasn't that type of a salesperson, and I was young, I was in my, early 20s. And so after that, I just started, doing whatever mostly office type jobs, that I could find that, that kind of were a good fit for me. And then after I was married and we had our son, I was kind of in a situation where, okay, this time since we've moved, I'm not going to be in a hurry to go find a job. And Eric was about 3 or 4, old enough that I could kind of start to pick up hobbies again. But so I was only truly in an interior design for maybe 4 or 5 years. But I picked up a lot of, I don't know, just in addition to my background, just an interest, just a little bit of business instincts and such along the way, the home decor sewing, and what went into that, and just kind of functioning and learning about how all that kind of fit together. It was interesting, but I just kind of phased out of it in a way.
Yeah. Well, and from what I read, you grew up in a household of mother as a sewing, and you had plenty of background, yeah. Definitely.
Both grandmothers. I still have quilts that were made by my great-grandmother and both grandmothers. And I remember my mother doing a lot of crewel embroidery.
Mm-hmm.
And, but yeah, it was just around me in one form or another, most of the time. And so it was an easy thing. I mean, I was anxious to learn how to sew, even when I was in middle school. And in my little town, we didn't have home ec in middle school. And my mom told me, she says, I want you to wait until you get to high school and have that teacher teach you how to sew properly. And so that was kind of where that was. And so it just kind of had always been there and always a part of me. I also had a lot of art. And so when I graduated high school, I kind of went back and forth between whether I was going to go into interior design or maybe graphic art.
Oh.
And so there's always been a little bit of a crossover. And so, fast forward a number of years, and I found both of those things, in addition to kind of the office job kind of experience I had, kind of all come together.
Yeah, you did combine them quite nicely. Well played.
Yes, it really, it was, I could never have planned it.
Well played. Yes.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that in a nutshell is kind of all that, how that happened.
Yeah. Because interesting, I don't know that you see that much in houses anymore. Because when I grew up, my mother sewed. My grandmother was a seamstress.
Yep.
She sewed everything, and my sisters, I still think, have a collection of Barbie doll clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember sewing those.
Yep. As did I.
Those have to be tedious.
They are not fun.
Now, I remember we of course we did the standard Sunday afternoon dinner at Grandma's, and it was not unusual to arrive at Grandma's, and the first thing was my sister's collecting new Barbie doll outfits.
Yes,
because my grandma had been making them all week, and they had quite a collection. And so
I have kind of an interesting story about, when it would near Christmas time, probably sometime in September, October, when we were out for one of those kind of family dinners, I had an aunt who was a seamstress, and she would measure us. And then she would go out and search the secondhand shops for dresses and, a lot of times kind of fancier things. And then at Christmas, we would open a box of dress-ups that were custom made and fitted for us.
Oh.
That's fun.
So, that was just one aspect of what I was around. And that went on for a few years. And when we got measured, we knew that we had new dress-ups coming that Christmas. Yep. That's a fond memory. So.
Yeah. No, that's great, and I'm sure that when you got them, they were just absolutely beautifully done too.
Oh, it was, yes, they were. I mean, they fit us. It wasn't like playing dress-ups with something that you had to kind of pin and tuck and all that kind of thing. They fit us.
And Christine, you've made some Barbie. Here we are. This is a stitching show.
It is. Well,
it is.
It's
kind of related. So
when I was, yes, we did the whole Barbie thing, but when I was a kid also, there was a doll, and I believe it was a Fisher-Price doll, and her name was Mandy. And she was maybe a foot tall, and for a long time, you could actually buy patterns for Mandy. And so that was one of the things that I used to do with my grandmother was we would get patterns, and then you could sew. And once you have a pattern, you can sew any, you can make it multiple times. So we would go through her stash, and so my Mandy doll had many items of clothing made of double knit because that's what my grandmother.
That dates us too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, right? Because she made all of her own clothes out of double knit. So,
yes.
And believe me, that's not fun to stitch when you're a kid because it all rolls.
Plus, whoever thought that was a good fabric to wear?
Polyester double knit? Well, in the 1970s,
it was bomb-proof.
That's what we.
It was bomb-proof. Yeah, it was.
But can you imagine a doll now being sold with patterns?
No.
I can't.
Well, yeah,
so and
nowadays you buy the doll over and over again in its different incarnations, as opposed to back in the day, you had the one doll, perhaps a second, and you made all the different kinds of clothes for them. So it's just a completely different outlook on it. So yeah, we continue to digress a little bit here, don't we?
That was fun though.
Yes, it was.
It's okay. No, I just remember that my grandma was, of course, my mom was raising kids, but my grandma, she was my grandfather worked for the railroad, so he would be gone entire weeks out on the rail lines, and so she had all day, every day, and she sewed up a storm, and we still have quilts that she made, and that was back in the day when quilts were made out of old shirts and old dresses and things. That was the repurposed fabric, And we have 3 or 4 of those, and they aren't going anywhere. Those are treasures as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. Yeah,
those days just kind of have gone. have gone.
Yes, it's not the same.
No. So, and then that's the other. I did not know that your business, Erica Michaels, named after your son.
Yes.
Because
yes.
I expected when I first somebody suggested you, I said, "Oh yeah, that's right. You're on my list in there somewhere." And I expected to talk to Erica, but not the case.
But
so.
Yes, when I started, it's been almost 20 years ago that I started. This little seed started to sprout just a little bit, and so one of the first things I looked into was, what am I going to name this? And it took a little while, and it was one of those things that happened when you're not thinking about it very hard.
Yep.
And I thought, well, what about my son's first name is Eric, his middle name is Michael. And I thought, well, what happened if I made it Erica Michaels? And so I went and I did an internet search to make sure there wasn't a whole lot of other stuff out there with that name, and went with it. And I will tell you that if you run into me at an event or email me and call me Erica, I do answer to it. In many scenarios, it's simply easier.
Right. Yeah. So how does that, I'm always fascinated by how that happens. As a mother, home ec, all that, and then you go to work at a shop, and then that transition to when you start designing that leads you, that takes you down that path. It just doesn't seem like a normal path to me.
Yeah, when we moved to the Tulsa, Oklahoma area, and I think it was in 1998, and that was at that point where I thought, I'm not going to be in a big hurry to go out and find the typical 8 to 5 office job. And a friend of mine who had lived in Tulsa previously I'd been chatting with her and telling her, Eric was old enough that I was going to be able to do a little bit of stitching or sewing again. And she says, oh, well, you need to go to the Silver Needle. And so I just, made a note of that. And I don't know, a few weeks later, I suppose it was, I walked in there, and it had been several years since I had been in a stitching specific shop. And the Silver Needle, as anybody who's familiar with it knows, is a substantial shop. And I was just kind of like, wow. And I was a customer for a little while and was kind of enjoying it. It was the Weeks Dye Works and Gentle Art, and those kind of cotton flosses were just kind of coming on board. There were a lot of other threads and flosses to choose from, which I had not been familiar with, so that was a lot of fun. And a lot of embellishments were starting to be seen, the buttons and the charms and those sorts of things. And so it was real fun for me to kind of explore some of that. And one day I went in there to do a little shopping again, and there was a little sign that said they were looking for help. And so I said, well, maybe I want to do that, because it was just a couple of days a week. And so they hired me, and the Silver Needle has always been a store that would kit up various designers' patterns, maybe not only kit them, but maybe do a little bit of a thread change or put their own stamp on it in some way. And most of us that worked in the shop just would get involved in that. And so it just was it kind of evolved from those sorts of things to helping out with a program that she's done for many, many years now called Secret Needle Night. And it's a monthly kit, simple design, that people would sign up for the year, and she would send out this little kit. And I started to help with those, just as we all kind of helped out with a lot of those things. And pretty soon I was actually designing a lot of them. And so it just kind of slowly evolved a little bit like that. And one day I walked in, and a couple of them, Lindy, the owner, and one or two others, I don't remember who, called me back to the work area, and they sat me down and they said, Linda, you need to be doing this.
An intervention.
Yes. And we'll help you out, kind of get started. And so I tagged along with her to the National Needlework Market for a couple of times, just to kind of get a taste of what all was out there, what, kind of how some of that worked. And by 1999, I published my very first pattern. And in the summer of 2000, I did my first trade show in Charlotte, North Carolina, when we still had the large convention format trade shows. And that was the start. You
were getting really an on-the-job apprenticeship, just putting together these kits in terms of deciding on colors and so on.
Exactly. And it wasn't like, it was just something we all helped with.
Yeah.
And so it was, but it just evolved more and more. And so that pretty soon I was doing the actual design for those monthly kits, as opposed to them maybe taking a freebie chart that was out there from somebody and kind of tweaking it and fixing it or something like that. And so they became original designs that they could publish. So that's really, I really have them to thank for it.
Yeah, so that gave them a real unique position in the market then, in that they were offering original things. Yeah. So for people who don't know, where is the Silver Needle?
It's in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, so that's my go-to spot when I'm in Tulsa.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
And been there forever, apparently.
She's been there, I'm thinking, for 30 years plus now. Mm-hmm. She's been there a long time. And she started out fairly small and then has just grown and grown and has a nice size shop, big website, does a big mail order business in addition to a large shop. So I was very fortunate to get hooked up with somebody that, could do as much as she does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, I'll have to check that out. I'll just have to check that out. You never know. I might buy something. Just never know. Okay, so I'm always curious, your first design, your very first design that you published, do you still offer that, or does that sit in a shelf somewhere?
No, it's been gone. It was one that was called Harvest Hannah, and she was done on, and those of you folks who've been doing this a long time might recognize things like the names like Tula and Clostern and Betsy Ross linen that were like 10 and 7 count. And she was a female scarecrow, basically.
Yeah.
And she was my very first design, and she was finished into what we call the stand-up. And she was done on 10 count in kind of what we called specialty fibers or specialty threads. So she had a lot of texture and buttons and some things like that on it. And she was my very, very first design. Yeah. I've not sold, or she's not been published or anything for quite a number of years now.
Yeah. Yeah, do they tend to run their course? Do designs tend to run their course?
Yeah, I have maybe one or two that go back to the early 2000s, 2005, something like that. I think they really do. As a designer, designs evolve, that the style evolves too. But the designs pretty much just run their course.
Do you think it's just change in taste, or do you think it's that the people that would want them have purchased them and now people are onto something new?
I think it's probably some of both.
Yeah.
I mean, if I talk to other of my stitching friends that have maybe a really large stash, and we talk about the fact that, when you go back and look at the older things, they're kind of like, well, I'm not probably going to do that because my tastes have changed.
Mm.
And so unless it's something that's maybe considered classic in some way, I think there are things that just kind of phase out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, because you tend to do, you do more sampler oriented work, and that's at least that's my impression. But your stuff looks more timeless to me. It really is.
And I would guess I would agree. I wouldn't necessarily call it sampler-like. My definition of a sampler tends to be what I think of as kind of the traditional reproduction type of samplers, and I dabble in that a little bit, but it's only part, I think, of my wider kinds of things. So I definitely have things that I designed in my early years that when I go back and look at those, I think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? But at the time, they were fine.
Right.
And so there definitely is some of that. And I had to just recently go through and do some organizing of some files, which meant that I went back through all of the files that I have, which means there's a file for every design that I've ever done. And that was quite a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
So do you have designs that from the past that pop back up again, that kind of get a new life?
Well, the recent example of that is the sampler book. And that stemmed from, I kind of go back to the secret needle night that I did at Silver Needle for several years. And even after I left and moved away from Tulsa, I still would send them those designs. Mm-hmm. I did those designs for them for a few years. But in part of that was the folks at Rainbow Gallery learned about me, because Rainbow Gallery threads were ones that we used quite a lot in those secret needle night and some other kinds of things. And so they asked me to design monthly charts for them to promote their thread line. And so I did that for them for a few years. And in fact, if you go to their website now, they're still there under free cross-stitch charts.
Oh.
And the last series that I did for them was this set that every month was a letter of the alphabet. And for the letter of the alphabet, we picked a specialty stitch, and I included different letter forms in it. It had a different border, and it had an image. So the first one was A for Algerian eyelet, and it had an acorn and upper and lowercase a's just in different letter forms around it. And they're just little. And so we did that for 2 years to get through the alphabet. Mm-hmm. And that was in like 2005, 2006, I think. And they got their, samples and, their charts, and they did all of that. But I was always one that was kind of wanting to experiment a little bit with different ways to finish things. I didn't like to just frame everything.
Yeah.
And it kind of went back to my sewing background that I enjoyed, doing some finishing. And so I stitched another round of these models and put them into a book format and put together a chart pack that explained to people, along with patterns and instructions and diagrams, of how to, if they were doing this series, how they could make it into a book. And that was published in 2006. And it sold fine for a few years. And every now and then I'd get a call, and somebody would want one or two of them, and that's fine. I could, it was one of those I could just print here in my studio and send it out. But this past summer, Jen of Jen's Stitching Niche, she's got an online shop. She apparently had dug hers out and had actually finished it. And so she posted her finish, like many folks do, on Instagram, and she put it on her FlossTube channel. And so she emailed me and she says, I need some of these.
Uh-oh.
And so I said, well, yeah, I can do that. And then so I sent her some, and she emailed me back. She says, I need some more. And so she was generating, based on, 12 years later, the internet and all the social media and all that kind of thing, ways that we can share and get the word out about different things. And I was at a couple of events this fall, retail events, one in St. Charles, Missouri, and another in Louisville, Kentucky. and I took the model with me, and just a handful of the patterns sold out.
Oh.
So this fall, I've made it available again. I'm only going to make it available through the end of 2019. It's going to, we'll do a cutoff on it. But it's really been kind of remarkable to me how something that's 12 years old that I hadn't really sold much of for several years has all of a sudden garnered some new interest. And I think it's because it's new to a lot of people, because it's been so long since it's been around. And a lot of it has to do with the internet.
Right. Yep. Well, when I described your stuff as having a timeless element to it,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really think that that's a huge plus. I meant that positively.
Yes. And I appreciate that, because I think that kind of in general, if is kind of my style. I don't do whimsical very well. And so.
Yeah, that's got to be a unique talent there. Yeah, whimsical.
Yes, yes. I don't do that very well. And so, I think for the most part, my things do tend to be more classic or timeless. That just is kind of where I go. I generally try to say something with my designs, or I like to. I don't always, but I like to. So, the story of the sampler book has been kind of an interesting one.
Well, we've talked many times about the internet and FlossTube and Facebook and the huge community it brings together, and the tremendous amount of sharing that goes on. And it really enhances the opportunity for that kind of thing to happen.
I think so. And I think, when the internet first came on, a lot of the retailers, I think it scared them a little bit.
Yes.
It was really viewed as very much the competition. And I think that, we've come a long way since then. Everybody's kind of embraced it, and we've come around to where I think it's actually benefiting, most people in a positive way, because of the kind of exposure that things can get. And so that retailers can still be selling those products, and their customers may not have heard about it except for something on social media or the internet.
Yeah, because it's a broader view that we all have.
Yes.
And
yes.
And the retailers who embraced it early on and continue to embrace it, I bet every single one of them would tell you it has become a much more of a positive than a negative. It's not a business stealer; it's a business enhancer.
Yes, although they do work very, very hard to keep it that way.
Yes.
But it doesn't just kind of run itself.
No. Well, that's one of the problems with the internet, is that it does take an awful lot of work for any retail business to stay on top of it.
Yes.
To get your orders out every day, to get your keep your website up to date. I mean, I've got as we're recording this, I ordered a new trainer for my bike. And it's been 3 days since they've shipped it, and I have to say I'm getting a little impatient with them. but and I thought, well, wait a minute, do I can live without this?
That's right. That's right.
But we have this expectation that the stuff is going to turn quickly.
Yes, and that is, to me, a little bit of a downside. But it's also what our overall culture has become, is much more of a desire for instant gratification, and it's kind of hard to slow down and be patient.
Yes.
But I think anybody who does needlework maybe understands that a little better than somebody who's not doing something that they have to invest some time and get enjoyment out of that process.
Mm-hmm.
I do when I'm stitching, but I want my trainer. Darn it. I mean, come on, ship that thing. It's only in Minnesota. I could have gone and picked it up by now.
That's right. That's right.
So I love. Before we got plenty of time, but I want to make sure that we explore these berries.
Sure.
You owe me at least a half hour of my life studying your berries. How does that whole series? I mean, that's an impressive series of little projects.
Yes, and I can't honestly. I don't know that I can really give you a real good, clear answer as to how it started, except to say that going back to where I like to explore other ways to finish something.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been after I had started the silk gauze petites line. And I was just kind of thinking about what else I could do with that, because the initial ones that I did on silk gauze, I framed a lot of those things. And I kept going back to my inner seamstress and thinking, well, what other things can I make out of silk gauze stitching versus just framing it? And so I think it was probably kind of a process. And one day I thought, well, maybe I can try this. And so it just kind of evolved over a period of time. It wasn't just a flash overnight or anything like that. And then several years ago, I just thought, well, I'm just going to introduce a few of them and see what happens. And they've taken off, and I now have, if I count both the silk and the linen versions of the berries, I now have perhaps 50 berries in the line.
Wow.
Yeah. When you go back and count, it adds up pretty quickly. Because in most cases I've designed a silk berry so that little berry that's only about 2 inches long is solidly stitched on 40 count silk gauze and it finished into a pretty little berry. And then there's another version of it, usually simplified a bit because the stitch count is not as large, that's done on linen, because I know not everybody wants to stitch that much on silk gauze. And so they're kind of little companions. And so they are pairs, a silk version and a linen version. And then in the case of the couple of recent series, I did the 12 berries of Christmas, and then I've done the caroling berries recently. Mm-hmm. They're a lot of fun. And you talked about at least a half an hour of your life. If you're ever in an area where I'm doing a class, that's a whole hour and a half you could give me. So,
well, think about that.
I do a class on finishing the berries, and do that at if I go to a shop for an event or a retreat or those sorts of things. I've got a berry finishing class developed, and it's about an hour and a half when we have a lot of fun just talking about how it happens, and the show and tell. I have all the models with me so that we can really look at them close and see how they were all done. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're neat little things. And then to finish them, does the chart, what is it, an arc like design that we wrap into a cone?
Yeah, it's kind of a cone or a fan shape when you lay it flat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With a curved across the top, and then 2 straight edges that come down to a point. And you basically just stitch up on them. I use a sewing machine, that straight edge, gather up the top and stuff it. And then you can get really, really creative with however you decorate the tops. Yeah. So in terms of finishing, I think it's one of the more simple finishes that you can do.
Well, I can see how they'd be really addictive.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. They're just a lot of fun. They're kind of multiplying, quicker than I maybe would have imagined. But so when I go to a show, it's getting more challenging to show them all in a way that's appealing and eye-catching and that sort of thing. But they really are a lot of fun.
Yeah,
because I've had a lot of fun with those.
I can see them as ornaments, but I can also see them in a basket or a bowl.
Exactly.
Yeah, all kinds of.
I've been displaying them on cake plates.
Oh.
Things or like the little tiered cake or dessert plates, because of their shape, they're easy to display in a circle. Mm-hmm. They kind of lay down in a circle, and so cake plates and those kind of things are really, really a nice way to show them off.
Well, they're a neat thing.
Yep. So that's the berry story.
Yeah.
And
well, I have to tell you about the Prince of Peace design. I have a story for your Prince of Peace design. It has to have been. has to have been 30 years ago.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Easter. The cover of the bulletin for the Sunday service
Okay.
was not that much different than your Prince of Peace design.
Wow. Wow.
And I
Isn't
took
that something?
I took that and I said, someday I am going to chart and stitch that.
Now I've saved you the trouble, right?
You exactly that. And I still have that bulletin. I still have the full bulletin. I mean, I kept everything.
Wow.
And when I saw that, I thought, wait a minute. And it's just a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But, yep, you saved me the trouble.
Well, how about that? You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, because I did a triple take. It's like, what? That is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. That's kind of a good example of a lot of my designs. I like to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And several times what I want to say comes from a song. I've sung in choirs most of my adult life. And so a lot of times that's where something will, I'll get an idea for something, whether it's the title or a verse, in the middle of it or something like that. And that's a good example of that, of coming from Handel's Messiah was where that one came from.
Right.
Yep.
The only voice in the choir with a notepad.
Well, yeah, there have been times where I have taken the pencil out of my choir folder and quickly circled something so that I can remember to do something more with it later. So
Excellent.
You just never know where an idea is going to come from. So
Yep. No, that's so true. Yeah. And you have the idea and you all remember that. And then a day later, what was that? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Write it down.
Exactly.
Yeah. You have lots of very inspiring religious-based pieces. I really enjoyed them.
Thank you. And that's really kind of where it comes from, is I'll be, sitting there with my little ladies choir and something will just hit me and I try to make a note of it some way and tuck it away and see if I can make something happen with it later. So
yeah,
it's, again, I don't do too much what I think of as illustrative design, as much as I like to say something, which maybe goes to my graphic art background.
Yeah.
And like to, that's kind of where things kind of lead me a good part of the time. So, and that's just one source. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Silk gauze is not something I've ever held in my hands. Talk about what it's like to stitch with that.
It's actually easier than stitching on high count linen because the holes are bigger. If you look at a piece of, say, 36 count linen and you lay it next to a piece of 40 count silk gauze, it will be real easy to see that the holes are bigger on the gauze. And the reason for that is that the threads of linen that are used to make our linens that we stitch on and our even weaves, they have thickness so that the fabric is opaque and solid.
Mm-hmm. So it's more dense.
It's dense and solid that way. Whereas the 40 count gauze is a mesh, and the threads that create the weave are very, very fine. And because they're so fine, it leaves more space between the threads of the weave. It's not creating a solid surface. And so the holes are bigger.
It always strikes me as a much more delicate ground cloth, though.
Yes, it is, but it's pretty tough. You only do a half a stitch with a single ply of floss.
Oh.
And so it's a simple technique. It's compared to needlepoint. So if you've done a tent stitch or a continental stitch or basket weave and that kind of thing on needlepoint canvas. It's just a real fine version of that. And in fact, most of my designs, I'm using a continental stitch, and I'm filling in the background with a basket weave.
Oh.
And it's, you know how most people are drawn to miniatures of something.
Right.
And a lot of us love the look of our stitching on the 36 or 40 and even the higher count linens. And there's something about something small that I think really appeals to most people. And not only do you get that with the 40 count, but you also get on the silk gauze, you get a real clarity and crispness in the detail, and you get a very intense color. And it just is a different look from if we're looking at regular traditional counted cross stitch, but you're still counting, you're still using a cross stitch chart for all intents and purposes. You're just doing a half stitch.
Is the intense color because the ground cloth isn't contributing any color?
That might be part of it, but I think most of it is because it's small and condensed.
Okay.
And it's that solid stitching then. And I think that's where that comes from. And so you get a very intense, crisp kind of detail that you just don't quite get otherwise. And that's always been very appealing to me. I first tried it 20 years ago, maybe not quite that long, 17, 18 years ago, and did a few of them and enjoyed it and put it aside. And I'm not quite sure I can tell you exactly what made me pick it back up again. But as a designer, my designs have evolved over the years. I'm not doing the same thing. And so as the years go by, I continue in my head to think, well, I can't be doing the same old. I need to be doing and looking forward, and what can I make that is different and new and interesting, not only for the folks out there, but for me.
Right.
And I think that was part of that process. As I was looking for what's next, what can I do that I can explore a little bit, and I latched onto this. It's been about 10 years now that I've been doing the silk gauze, and I've done a little bit of teaching. When I go to events, I do a lot of talking to convince people that they really can do it. I think people get a little bit intimidated, but the actual stitching technique is very simple. And if you get yourself in your little stitching nest, and if you can set yourself up so you can see it, that's the key. Whatever light or magnification works best for you, then you sit down and you just start stitching. And I think the results are so gratifying. And shoot, your framing bill's not near so big.
Mm-hmm. That can be crippling sometimes. That's
right. And so you have little small things. So if you like to do the small things, but and I love it. It's not the only thing I want to stitch, but it is. I have in many ways. If I've been stitching on linen on some things for a while, I find myself glad to get back to gauze.
All right. I'm going to have to try that too.
I tell everybody, if they kind of look at me with, kind of that weird look in their eye, I said, at least try it.
Gonna have to give that a try. Okay.
Yeah. You have to at least try it.
All right.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. I expect to hear back. So.
Okay. Well, it does. When just the word silk gauze, it just is an intimidation factor there.
Yes.
The connotation of gauze.
Yes. Yes. But it's pretty stiff. It's actually got pretty good body to it. So it's not film. When we think gauze, we think of something very soft and
right.
And it's not that at all. And it's also very evenly woven. So for folks who find stitching on linen frustrating because of the unevenness of the threads and the slubs and those kind of things, that does not exist stitching on the gauze. And if folks who like to stitch over one get frustrated with the way that your thread likes to slide behind your linen threads when you're stitching,
yeah,
that also is not an issue on the silk gauze, all because of the way that it's put together.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
One more thing. Thanks a lot. Mm-hmm. I think I'll wait a couple of months till, because my wife will go, for crying out loud. What?
Yeah. What are you trying now?
Yeah.
That's right. Right. But you need to at least give it a shot. So.
Okay. All right. It's on the list. List. Talk about your Train a Dog, Save a Warrior affiliation. These programs that help veterans, I just think are terrific.
Yes. I live in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is adjacent to the Fort Campbell Army base. And so we've lived here for all 18, 19 years now. And so I've gotten to know a lot of people connected with the military. And there's just a lot of activities around the community that are affiliated with them or integrating with them in some way or shape, form. And I was reading maybe the newspaper one day when I still read a newspaper that there was an article about an organization that was having a little fundraiser, and they were raising money for this program here in Clarksville. And I'm an animal lover too, and I thought, well, gee, this is just kind of a win-win for not only the veteran who needs a service dog, but also the dog who is being rescued from a shelter situation. And so I went online and looked at them a little bit, and they're based out of San Antonio, Texas, and they have trainers all around the country. And so I investigated a little bit and talked to them and that sort of thing, and just thought, well, I wonder if there's a way that I can do something here. And so I just started, I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, that I give a portion of the proceeds of my Americana or patriotic themed designs, and twice a year, once at Memorial Day and once on Veterans Day, I make a donation based on the sales for those previous months. And I just think it's a win-win for these folks. That's just my little way to help out with
Well, that's the way differences are made right there.
Exactly.
So this is an organization that takes dogs, rescues dogs, and then trains them to be service dogs?
Yes. The way it works in at least most places, I think around here, is that the trainer actually helps locate in area shelters dogs that are good candidates for that kind of training.
Oh.
And then they, work to match up those dogs that they find with a veteran in the area who has maybe applied through TADSAW to get on the list to get this kind of help with a dog. And so the trainer is kind of helping to match up that dog and, find them, whether it's in a shelter. I think sometimes they're able to take a family pet and do that training, but a lot of times it is a dog that is, is in a shelter situation that, might otherwise not survive if they're not pulled and put in a situation like this where they can, become a service dog.
Well, that's a huge win on both ends for sure.
Oh gosh, yes. And it's, it's not like I'm not having to work very hard to make a donation. And the last few times I've been able to give them $400 or $500. So it's, just like any of those things, every little bit helps.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And training those dogs is not cheap, is it?
No, it's not. I think they say that although they hand out the funds just as they're going along, they don't wait until they have a certain amount of money before they let the veteran start training with their dog. But they say, I believe it's $2,500 to $3,000 per team that they figure it costs to do that training. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so no. Yeah, it really is. It really, really is. And there are other organizations around the country that are doing similar things. This just happened to be the one that I got connected with because of the trainer that I read about here in the Clarksville area. Yep.
So people get out, buy the patriotic designs so that she can contribute more.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
All right, now we are going to run out of time, but I got to learn about your studio. Tell us about your workspace.
My studio is in what is often referred to as the bonus room.
Okay.
In this house, it's about 13 by 14 feet. It's not very big. I kind of overflow into a spare bedroom, but it's got a big work table, and it's got my desk, my computer, a couple of printers. It does not have a stitching space in it. There's just not room for that. I stitch in the family room where I have the cats on my lap or whatever else is going on. But it's a space I fixed up several years ago because I spent so much time there. I fixed it up so it wasn't just a boring bonus room. It's a room that I can that I have things in it that I love, and I have things on the walls that I like, and pieces that I enjoy, and I can just enjoy spending my time in there too. It's not very big. It's kind of surprising what a person can get done in a surprisingly small space.
Well, for most, having a 13 by 14 room dedicated to needlework is huge.
Pretty great.
Yes, it is nice that I've got that dedicated space. I'm kind of wishing I had a little more so that I didn't have to overflow into another room for storing some things. And in fact, right now, my stash of floss that I like to hang where I can see the color has been moved to another room where I can keep the door closed because the 2 cats we have are not yet a year old.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
So if I had left all of that in my studio, it would just have been a kitty climbing wall. So.
Yeah, I can see that after about an hour. Oof. Ooh.
Yeah.
Not pretty.
But no, it's a space I spend a lot of time in, but it's a space that I enjoy being in. I've got some antiques. I've got some old family things that are related to needlework. I have an old sampler from a 4th grade aunt that's hanging on the wall in my studio. So.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That's a treasure. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So are you in a position where you're able to work at home and just have your work day be in your studio?
Pretty much. Although I did work another kind of what I called a day job until about a year ago at the local university, where I was just another staff office type job. But then Eric was finished with college and some other things like that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to retire from that and get to do this full time. And it's lovely.
Yeah, there's one of those milestones. The kid graduated from college. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Has the job with the 401k and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And so now I can do this full time, and I can get out and travel a little more and go do events and that sort of thing. Whereas I really didn't have the flexibility to do that for about 10 years.
Right.
And this lets me do that. So
as a friend of mine once said, my kids are off the payroll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know that they're ever completely off the payroll, but it's a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Christine, you're not too far away from that though. Coming fast.
No, I'm getting close.
Coming fast. Yeah, it's a good day.
It's gratifying. It is gratifying. Yeah. It's pretty exciting. So yes, Erica Michaels is he was entering kindergarten when I started this venture.
Yeah.
And now he's 24 and working a real job and becoming an adult. So.
Yay! That's the way it's supposed to work out.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
well,
real
Linda,
proud of him. So.
Linda, this has been a treat. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you asking me, and look forward to listening to you talk to other folks. Are you going to be in Nashville again?
Yes.
Excellent.
We'll hunt you down.
All righty.
And we'll do a video.
You. Yep. You're very welcome.
All right. Thanks to everybody for listening. Christine and I will be back on Wednesday.